About 5 or 6 years ago, I stumbled upon a little YouTube video called Dinosaur Island Season 3, Episode 11, A Tough Journey, by creator Dinosaur. This was my exposure to an entire genre of YouTube videos, and initially I was going to rank every single one, but that project didn't quite pan out. It ended up being too long and just too time consuming, and my general enjoyment of making it kinda wore thin. That left me with several scripts and ideas left unused. So I've decided to turn that ranking video into a little mini-series, where I go over several different shows within this genre, and review every season of them, some more in-depth than others. We will be starting with Dinosaur Island by Dinosaur, which, again, is the show that introduced me to this genre. Dinosaur Island is a show I am incredibly nostalgic for, and because of that, it puts me in a weird place where on the one hand, I wanna give it, positive reviews. I want it to be good, but on the other hand, looking back, can be more harsh on it because I know it can be good. So yeah. Starting with Season 1. Season 1 has classic characters, though none of these characters really did much. Bloodtooth didn't really win me over until Season 3, and every other Season 1 character is somewhat forgettable, at least in terms of what they do in this season. There's also no story whatsoever. Oh, and it's barely watchable. Season 2 is actually mostly watchable, and there's a decent quality improvement. But while the production quality still may be low, the season has the advantage of having a much larger, in my opinion, far more interesting, more memorable cast, with established bonds, rivalries, and dynamics. They mostly all have stories to follow. If you ask me, this season was the first season that kind of set the trend of how many shows in this genre would end up being written, with lots of characters, with individual plot lines that sometimes overlap and interact with each other. Season 3 is a more competent editing style than Season 2, but I feel as though its camera work is still roughly on the same level of quality. It also does help that at this point Dinosaur was kinda working on moving out some of the cheaper figures. I believe that's why he killed Hammer to begin with in one of the earliest episodes of this season. And this season has no moments that I'd call completely unwatchable, so it's kind of funny that this is the standard now, but I think that's good. And in my opinion, Season 3 is the tightest story of the show. And this sounds like a crazy thing to say, but if you think about it, every major group of characters in the season interacts and affects each other's arcs, at least to some extent. The only real exceptions are Katie and the Pillar and Stoneback stuff, but the Rexes, Red Sail, the Raptors, Blizzard, all of the stories fit together rather nicely. Though in some cases, like in Blizzard or Red Sail, they weren't super interesting on their own for me. This is also the season that got me to like Bloodtooth, so it's worth noting that much. Then we come to Season 4. Season 4 is a major technical update. It was filmed in better environments, had pre-recorded narration, used stock roads instead of mouth-made roads, and had an epic original soundtrack. The Dinosaur Island main theme is actually one of the best things to come out of the entire show, in my opinion. And while a few of the tracks feel out of place, they mostly work and are a highlight. The overall production quality of the scene does suffer quite a bit, especially in faster paced scenes, like fight scenes or chase scenes, which unfortunately for this season there are lots of. Scenes like this usually end up more blurry. I mean, if we just compare a more still scene to a more chaotic scene, it's a clear difference. This also makes it so my favorite Season 4 episode is probably In the End, mainly because it doesn't have any of these scenes, and thus is much more consistent quality-wise. As for the story and the characters of this season, I like Red Sail's arc, but I don't really get why he has to fight the Collecte Spino instead of Dark Claw. And I don't really like Jane's arc. Not because it's an edgy revenge story, I mean, it is, but that's more of a taste thing. But because it just feels contrived. Like, let's go through some of the beats. We have her first scene, Bloodtooth saves her, Owen saves Bloodtooth, and then in the fight with Fang and Caroline, somehow both of her parents die, when realistically, after Owen died, Bloodtooth and Jane should have just gotten out of there. And then she almost gets killed by a Baryonyx several episodes later, and Nigel just pops out, kills the Baryonyx, and conveniently recognizes Jane as one of Bloodtooth's offspring, even though if you think about it, Jane is an offspring of Owen, the Tyrannosaur who kicked out Nigel. So then wouldn't that technically make Jane Nigel's rival at this point in the story, or Nigel's competition, future competition anyway? And it's just like, Owen as a character, he only exists to save Bloodtooth and to kick out Nigel, and I guess also to, actually not even to Tyne Jr., because Jr. was Grant's son, so Owen really just exists to kick out Nigel and Jr. Nigel himself is pretty good in this season. I like his fight with the Allosaurus quite a lot, but I found his death in the last episode to be pointless. What happens is Nigel dies, and then Jane just straight up goes Super Saiyan and kills both Carcharodontosaurs like they're nothing. What I think would have been a better choice is either having Nigel get the first kill, maybe on Caroline, and then Nigel dying to Fang, and then having the final fight be a 1v1. Or even better, just don't have Nigel dying in the final fight. Like, I get he had to be written out in order for Jane's story in Season 5 to work, but still, I feel like there's something you could have done with Nigel that would have been better than just killing him randomly. And this also ties into my biggest problem, some of my most hated characters, not in this show, but within this entire genre, and that is Fang and Caroline, the Carcharodontosaurs. They start off fine, like, they kill Bloodtooth and Owen, which obviously makes them enemies to Jane. There's some personal stake there, but, like, they, at that point, are not particularly, like, they're not evil, they're not exaggerated, but then suddenly in episode 8, the show just decides that they've been overhunting, and suddenly they are evil, they are exaggerated, they need to be killed. It went from a pretty interesting personal story to these Carcharodontosaurs are basically supervillains that must die. And then I just gotta give a shout out to William, Michael, Mars, the random Kentrosaurus, Mirgai, and Carnotaurus, and Silas, because these are all characters I consider filler characters, in this season at least. I mean, most of them are self-explanatory, but as for Silas, he gets kicked out by Darkclaw, abused by the Raptors, and then once Delta dies, he's basically forgotten about for most of the season, until he suddenly just reappears with no payoff to all the setup he got. Yeah, I consider Silas to be a filler character in this season. Alright, so far this review has been mostly negative, especially Season 4. I feel like I don't know why, maybe it's all the hype, maybe it's that I used to consider the best season, but Season 4 is just the season I'm the most harsh on critically. I guess, like, Season 1 to 3 were never really meant to be taken seriously. I still don't fully take them seriously. It just kind of have done more childlike vibe to them, I guess. Season 4 and 5 are the ones that I more critically assess, and Season 4 has lots of issues. Then there's Season 5, the season that never finished. Now, this season has the best production of any of the seasons, by far. It may not have an original soundtrack, but the choices of music match pretty much every scene. And when it comes to some of the music I use in my videos, I usually look to this season specifically for inspiration, because it just has such a great, not just great music choices, like Russ Bugnan, for example, he has great music, but great usage of music and swimming between music. Way more of this season was filmed in a Bioniclesaurus's backyard than the old season. But this puts the shots together in kind of a better way, creates a more immersive experience than just putting plastic dinosaurs in the forest and leaving it at that. And this season's the peak of the series, I don't need to tell you that. I claim that season 3 had a tightly written story, and I do believe that. But season 5 has the best individual stories. Jane's story in the season is a lot slower, but that kind of makes it way better than the season 4 story. Razor's slow death, and I know he didn't die in any of the 7 episodes, but come on, there's no way he doesn't die by the end of... Like, if he got to its final 9th episode, I'm sure he would have died. They were building to that so heavily. And then, I want to talk a bit more about death, because Season 4 had a lot of it, Season 5 has a lot of it, but Season 5 knows how to do it right. Maggie's death alone was leagues better than any character death in Season 4. Maggie's death was several times better than Bloodtooth's death, Nigel's death, Violet's death, any of the other major deaths in Season 4. But the most tense and arguably the most grim storyline is Ernest and Doyle's. The pair never really gets a moment of rest, constantly being hunted by one and later on more Giganotosaurus. And just when it seems they made it to a potential safe zone, Doyle gets ripped apart by the Gigas, which, due to the fact that the season never finished, is the last scene in all of Dinosaur Island. Ultimately, both Season 4 and 5 kinda tried to be darker, they tried to have more character deaths, but I feel as though Season 5 was able to do this, because Season 4, the characters were strong until they won. Using Nigel as an example again, he was not going to die in the Allosaurus fight. Even though it looked like he would have, like he was on the ground, realistically, he probably would have been killed by that point. But he was not going to die, because Nigel had plot armor at that point. But as soon as he needed to die to set up Jane's arc in the next season, Nigel just got murked absolutely easily. But in Season 5, there is no plot armor. Like, Razor is dying, Uno is not in good health, Maggie just dies randomly, Spike just dies randomly, Doyle dies randomly. And that is, it sounds kind of grim, and it is, but I do prefer Season 5's kind of random streak of unfortunate deaths over Season 4's a character is strong until they suddenly aren't pattern, which just annoys me. And even though the season did never finish, I do think that Cascade is at the very least a pretty good finale to this season, just because it kind of, like, it gives off a more grim vibe about Dinosaur Island, and how, like, you can have your happy endings, you can have your Season 4s, but, like, it doesn't really end. I say this, it's ironic, because the show ended early. But, like, the troubles of these dinosaurs will never really come to an end. And I think that Season 5 does a good job showcasing kind of the cruel coincidences that they kind of have to go through. I consider Season 5 to be a masterpiece, but it does not fully redeem the faults of the first 4 seasons. Nothing will. And I have some respect for Season 1 to 3. I can still enjoy Season 4, but not as much as I used to be able to. And I unironically love Season 5. Now, how am I going to score these? How am I going to rank these? I've decided to split it up into 3 categories that I have discussed kind of throughout this video. the production quality, the story, which I know story encapsulates like world building, themes, characters, and plot, but for the purposes of these rankings, I'm only going to be covering world building, theming, and mostly plot in this category. And then characters will be a completely separate category, as I feel they're so much more important to these kinds of shows, and are usually the most memorable part of these shows for me. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be scoring all of these out of 10, adding them up to a fraction out of 40, and turning that into a percentage above 100, obviously. The production quality score of this show is a 6. The story score is a 5. The characters score is a 9. That puts its overall score at 67%, its best episode being Cascade. And this is where it ranks for now. I don't have anything to compare it to. But yeah, 67%. Kind of gonna give some unscripted thoughts, because some of these reviews are months old. I feel like in the script, I can't decide if I was too harsh on season 4 or not harsh enough. But I do feel like I know. Oh yeah, and I don't have much to say on this segment. I'm gonna have one of these unscripted segments at the end of every video, because some of these scripts are months old by now. But yeah, Dinosaur Island. It is incredibly nostalgic. It is an undeniable classic. It is in many ways not as good as you probably remember it, but it is also in many ways a masterpiece.